Hello, welcome to another UTS Startups Confessions. Okay. Now, you'll notice, people watching at home will notice there's a smaller than usual audience, but it's for a very special reason, which is a very special guest. I don't think I've been as nervous or as excited for an interview as I am for this one, and you'll find out why in a second. Rob, thank you for joining us today, because we talk a lot about the role models that we want people to have, and you are the role model that I want almost everyone to have. And so, in 10 seconds, what is ServiceRocket?
How do I live up to that?
Yeah, it's downhill from here.
Yeah, so ServiceRocket, I think the corporate pitch, we're a tech-enabled services company, and we help our customers get the most out of their software and systems. But really, for me, it's about building careers and helping our Rocketeers, that's what we call our people, and helping our Rocketeers learn and grow so they can have an impact on their careers, their families, and their communities. So that's kind of what I'm about.
Okay.
What we're doing.
So that sounds like a company that's large enough to have that kind of concern. What does a company look like today for those that don't know?
We're about 350 odd people in 9 or 10 locations around the world.
Okay.
Spanning from, we started in Sydney and through Asia, in Malaysia, Philippines, and I'm based out of the US usually. We have Canada, Santiago, India, the UK, Singapore. Probably left something off. But the way the world has changed, though, it's easier to hire people now in different locations. And so we have a group in El Salvador, and last month we launched a small team in Nairobi, in Kenya.
Okay, so take us back for the people that aren't yet you. Who were you before ServiceRocket?
So I was pushing trolleys at IKEA. That was my first job. And a friend of mine that I worked with at IKEA was studying engineering at UTS. And as I was coming up to year 12, Dean, g'day Dean, brought me in. So I grew up in Toongabbie in Western Sydney. Caught a train in and took me downstairs to UTS. And I was like, man, I gotta get here. So it became that. And I remember for my marks, I got in by a quarter of a mark. And I studied a Bachelor of Science in Computing Science. 4-year degree, and in UTS fashion, it's 2 years, 1 year industry, and 1 year back. And at that stage, Des, the industry liaison, had said, we have a 95% student placement rate for the industry year. And I'm a pretty logical guy. So I was like, well, if I'm the second last person who just made it in, I might not have a spot when it comes to year 3. So after the first semester, I went looking for an internship, and I landed work experience at a small office of a US software company. And that company was called Borland Software.
Turbo assembler.
Yeah, so Turbo Pascal, Delphi, C++, and I started there on an internship on the support desk. And after 2 weeks of doing that, they asked me to stay. And I fell in love with support and software, and I kept doing that, and I switched to my degree part-time. And
did you finish?
Yeah, I finished in 4.5 years.
Okay, fair enough.
So Borland was a whole world, because it was, I was doing support, helping with pre-sales. I went into consulting, and they had an engineering group here. So I ended up over the next couple of years doing that. But I learned so much. This is 97, 98, 99. We would get CDs from Scotts Valley, which is on the other side of Silicon Valley, and from the Borland HQ. Like, here is the latest dump of stuff. And I was the young kid. So I didn't get to support the great products. I was doing the old products, the DBase, Paradox, and some of these other things that don't exist. And then this new CD came in, and everyone was enamored with C++ and Delphi. And they said, oh, you can take this one. And the CD said latte. I'm like, what is this? Put it in. It was like a beta version of JBuilder and Java. And so I started learning how to program in Java and teaching myself that. And then it turned out that the internet was going to become less about Pascal and C++ and heavily into Java. And so I caught that wave, and Borland acquired some other companies, and I started learning those products and got into enterprise Java and got some trips to the US and different places. And the first time I went to Silicon Valley, I was like, wow, I've got to be here.
Okay.
And very similar to when I was like, hey, I've got to be here at UTS.
Okay.
So that was kind of how that connected. I'll bring it back around. And then I ended up moving to Silicon Valley and teaching training courses, teaching Java, teaching different things. And then the market crashed in 2001, and I moved back here. And I started our company. So we used to be called Customware. That was what I started. And we renamed. But and 6 months after I started, I graduated.
Okay. So, how do you go from teaching people things in Silicon Valley and getting paid by the hour, or however that worked, to then launching a software product in Sydney after that? Like, talk me through that process and the origin of the idea as well.
Yeah, so we're predominantly a services company that builds apps and builds technology. So at the time I was working in the US, I actually started contributing to a lot of open source, both in community answering questions, and also there was a product called JBoss, which was subsequently acquired for many hundreds of millions of dollars. But I worked on early versions of that and in the evenings and kind of learned that technology in the Java space. So when I started the company here, I started teaching training courses because that's what I was doing in the US. So I would teach, I think the very first course I taught was here in Sydney doing web methods. So I was teaching, and I remember there was this really aggressive student in the course that wouldn't let me finish anything, was just asking question after question after question. And at the first break, he came up and gave me his card. He said, look, I got to go. I run the e-business division at Johnson & Johnson, and we need you there next week. And so he attended the course as a student, but to interview somebody to help them out. And I ended up going there the next week and building them some stuff. We ended up taking a distributor system. All the distributors in China would fax orders through, and people would do data entry in an SAP system. We automated that in like a week as a prototype. And as a one-person company, we landed an inn, and then I got one of my high school friends to help me, and then as a two-person company, we delivered some projects and started growing from there bit by bit. So we were doing training, projects, and support, and in the enterprise Java space. And in 2003, a friend of mine from Silicon Valley said, hey, do you know Mike? I'm like, yeah, I've seen the name around. And it was, so we got an introduction to Mike and Scott from Atlassian, who were also doing support in the Java space at that stage. That's how they started. So they were supporting a competing product to what we were working on. And then they started building Jira. And when you used to pay for Jira, you used to pay $2,000 and you would get the top version, and they would give you the source code, right? It's a little bit more expensive now. And we had a project at J&J that was around change control. And I was like, wow, we could take pieces of Jira and do this. So I said to them, can I buy Jira for the source code to use on this project? And I'll buy a license for J&J. And it was like, okay, let's work that out. So we did that. It was the very first ever resell for Atlassian. And it helped create the resell program that for them is pretty significant. So we deployed that. And over the years, we've done many firsts. We built support centers for them. We built training offerings. We built the first apps for their platform, first commercial apps, and done a variety of different things. So really what we do is partner with companies like Atlassian. We do a lot of work with them. And we help their customers get the most out of that software. The software itself doesn't solve a problem. It sits there, and then really around in an enterprise, there is there are humans, right? And us humans generally don't like change. So to adopt software or change something, that's really what we're in the business of doing, is helping companies adapt and make them more efficient with what they're doing and having them be successful rather than just selling software and having it sit there. So.
But there's so many people that do consulting services of different kinds that do wonderful things. It's a wonderful job to do, but they don't become 300-person companies.
Yeah.
Where did your initial growth come from?
Well, we grew to like 40 or 50 before we were doing heavy work in the Atlassian space, before that space could support it. A thing you want to do is really take care of customers, and you have to solve problems. So typically, services businesses I love, although a VC or an incubator will tell you not to do a services business, do a product business because it's more scalable in general.
I'm not going to tell you that, but
okay. The key is, how do you scale a services business, right? So we call ourselves a tech-enabled services business, right? We're not a bunch of lawyers that are clocking time. So I would say the very small micro services business is a contractor who might just be optimizing their tax and, hey, I'm invoicing through a company. No real aspirations to grow. I think what I did at the beginning, I didn't mean to start a company. It wasn't like I'm going to go and create a company and build this thing. I started Customware as a subsidiary of my US company that I was working at, because the market crashed and I needed to build customers. And then after I'd created it, the US company got acquired. And so they had asked me, Salil asked me, are you coming back over here? And I'm like, no, I'll keep this thing going. I'm going to get married. I'll stay here. It's working. And that's what was our company. So there was no incubators back then. There was no go and create a startup. And the word entrepreneur, I couldn't spell it, right? It was just like, okay, we need to pay bills. We need to provide value. We have to earn our paycheck from our customers. So we wanted to build innovative things. So I think going back to the question, services companies die when they grow too quick, right? And services companies die when they lose focus. And like many companies, I think product is more hit and miss. Services is about nailing the basics. And then nailing the basics. And then nailing the basics, right? You don't see Roger Federer say, look, I've done the practice and the warm-up before. I never need to do it again, right? And sport is a really good example, like professional athletes. Like, we treat our Rocketeers like athletes. Like, you've got to have that mentality that you're arriving at the game. It's game day. Just because you won the championship last year doesn't mean you can rock up. We've all seen that in every sport. The arrogant champions that turn up don't win. Right? And so how do you take that element and scale that? And it's not easy, but it's simple is not easy, right? So,
Yeah.
but it is simple.
But like going back to that start, like you say, it's easy to build something too quickly, have a big cost base that falls over, or to not find that kind of couple.
And I've done that many times, right? I've almost killed this thing many times by doing that. So.
You've been okay. What were those ingredients that went in early on that set it up to be something that was not doing those silly things? In the absence of entrepreneurial networks and other things to learn from back then, where were you getting your information, and what allowed you to do it?
So the mentors have been really key. So from the beginning, I always had folks that I was talking to or learning from, and some of them didn't know it, but there was always people that you're picking the brains off. As a key one, around 2007, we put in our company values, which is something quite common now, but back then, I was working on technology and servicing customers, and I'd probably never read a business book. And so being opened up to, oh wow, there's a whole world of learning how to build a business. And I joined the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is an organization of 18,000 CEOs and founders that in all different kinds of businesses. Not a lot of tech. It's actually a lot of just real companies. And through there, met a lot of different people, got a lot of different perspectives, and you would share problems and get a pointer that maybe read this book or check this out or Google search that, and bring those things in. So I've made so many mistakes.
Okay.
Well, so
I think people are itching to know
isn't
some
that
of
this
the
thing's confessions? Like,
yeah, bring it on.
Stuff, right?
Let's get into that because like
there's no fancy story of like big idea in the corner. Oh my God, I'm going to go and change the world. I haven't had any of that.
But it sounds like initial growth was fantastic. Where were the kind of mistake moments that got you to the growth moments later on?
Yeah. So like I said, I think if you grow too fast and you lose sight of the basics, I think it's extremely dangerous, right? And there's times that we've done that. Like whenever we've had to have around a layoffs or like a reset, like okay, we've shot over what we're doing. You can call those things failure points. So if I think about some of the early ones was us not understanding or learning how to forecast, right? When you grow a company, so we'll focus on services, but anything, and you're in a bull market or a growth market, you just expect work to come in, and you don't go and earn the work, and you don't appreciate the work, or yes, that'll be there, and you're consistently running a balance here of do you have the work, and then do you have the people to do the work. So the last 20 years has always been lots of work, but then a struggle to keep the people. Because there's so many things out there and so many companies paying and overpaying and paying and paying that maintaining a workforce is hard. So I think any time that we've assumed work would come in or taken anything for granted, you just take your eye off the basics, right? So you got to come back to, what value are you providing to the customer? What value are you providing to the employee, right? If the cost to do business with you is too expensive, you won't do business. If the cost for an employee to work for you is too expensive, not just in their emotional energy or the friction to get their job done, then you're going to get pain there too. So I think most recently in 2017 to 2018 was a really big pivotal point for our company. And we run a 7-figure payroll and got to a point where it's like, what, how are these numbers gonna work out? And the growth of myself as a leader and as a CEO is really mirrors like, okay, yeah, I've got to have a reasoning or a realization that I'm accountable to driving the results. So it's common that like some of the common phrases is like, hey, keep people happy and they'll take care of your customers and everything's good. And hire smart people and just get out of their way, right? And those are very common things that are drilled into entrepreneurs, right? And things are true, but they're also not true, right? So we had multiple offices. We want to keep employees happy. So when the HR manager in one location says, oh, we should provide this benefit for our team, it's only $50. Yeah, go ahead and do it because you're busy doing something else. So over time, those little decisions start bringing up inequalities. So now another office says, why don't we get that? We'll get that too. And then things spiral out of control. And you end up in this pattern where you're just continually trying to keep people happy. And then they see what Google offers. Why don't we get that? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, right? Now I'm evil because I'm not doing what, multi-billion-dollar companies do.
Don't have a slide in the office, yeah.
Yeah. So, so going back to just simplicity, and I was trying to explain things to the team in realistic terms, or if the company's a tree and everyone's asking for things all the time, then that's like, well, take the branch, take the roots, take the trunk. There's nothing left, So we changed the mantra of the business, which is now grow the tree, share the fruit. So now any decision that people ask or want, the default answer is, how does it grow the tree? Right? And we would rather grow the tree and have it produce a lot of fruit and share the fruit, because that's sustainable. Right? So the mental models of putting those in the business, I think, have been huge. On the other side of things, and I've fallen in this trap a lot of times, where when you work in a very dynamic company or a very immature company, right? And you're like, great, it's time to hire a C-level, and you hire someone from the corporate world. You're basically going to get what they previously did. So if you hire someone from Apple, you're going to get Apple's version of whatever it is. And your company, our company, couldn't support some of those things that we had brought in. But it was this conflict, because you're saying, oh, I want to hire a great person in HR or finance or what are the other areas, right? Or sales or whatever it is. And they want to build what they previously built, because that's what they've learned. But it may not work for your company and your customers and your systems, right?
So who do you hire?
That's been the real struggle. And so 2018, we went back to stop hiring those type of folks and letting them get out of their way, because what happens is after 2 years or so, they build what they wanted to build. And if it's not working, they just leave. And as an entrepreneur, what are you left with? If it's someone else's creation.
Yeah.
And then what do I do with it, right? So we actually, what I did in 2018, we started rebuilding the company, and the mentality I had for the company was, this company is like software. So we actually started building all of our processes and systems as if the company was software.
Talk me through that.
So things are very algorithmically driven, not hierarchically driven. Things are built so that we take inputs and data from the system to help us inform our decisions, versus make an emotional decision and then try and find the data to justify it, right? And that's been like mind-blowingly successful for us. And yeah, so that's been a really big thing and a really big realization for me. And now I have a runway, a line of sight to how we as a company can get to 5,000 people. Because I think the system that we built, because it's like software, I'm like, great, we'll scale. We'll be able to do this, we'll be able to scale and do that. So.
Okay, and that's the thing, like you say, people in incubator environments often talk about service-based companies as something they don't want. And if you look at the data, like I've looked through all the old fish burners companies with Pete Davison, if you're watching, and the most common kind of company that succeeded were initially people mid-career coming out of big companies, starting a service-based company, and then getting a couple of clients, and then productizing something and scaling that out to something more interesting. And you live in Sydney, like you need to make money. It's a wonderful way to manage the risk in starting a company.
Well, I think it's been look, a software business is the most scalable thing that you can build, right? So, and the wave of, I started the company in 2001, and it's kind of, I feel old now, because we tell our team, hey, we started the company probably a couple of months after Google did. Facebook didn't exist, and oh, sorry, the iPhone didn't exist either, right? So when I moved to Palo Alto, we would see Steve Jobs walking down the street, and no one would know who he is, right? Like it was like, okay, there he is, great, cool, right? So, and it's totally different now, right? So it's kind of, think of a world with no social media and no phones, and
sounds pretty good, yeah.
But so the world will change. Like that was like 20 years, right? So things are moving a lot quicker. So I think in the services business, the core, actually with all businesses, the core thing that's the same is you have a customer who is a human who you need to enact change on. Something's going to change. They're trying to evolve. Companies or people that don't evolve don't buy things new. They just buy the same things. Not really a good opportunity, but most of the market opportunity that you'll look at is change. So the services businesses can be at the forefront of that change because you can deliver on that change really quickly. You can deliver a result on that. So in our model, we kind of forward deploy solution architects to work on change projects. And then you're bringing back those ideas and saying, what can you, oh wow, we've done the same thing 3 times, 4 times, we're seeing a pattern. How do we now build that into an app or build that into a platform or a solution? So right now we're really big on building apps versus building platform. We used to have a learning platform called LearnDot, which ran education for companies like Splunk, Cloudera, Zendesk, Nginx, Atlassian, a whole bunch. And we realized that the platform game is a totally different game that we don't want to be in. Because everything moves up stack, and it's far better for us to build the app layer rather than building the infrastructure layer. But building apps is a good thing. So, yeah.
Okay, and that's the how to get to 5,000 people part of the plan.
So my vision is really, if you think of, so we're at 350 in a dozen or so locations. And so if you categorize the different services companies, you've got, contractors, then you've got a company where you might have a couple of family members or a couple of people and, close knit. You might get kind of small scale where you've got, okay, I've got a couple of locations, maybe just within Australia, a handful. To go multinational is a big step because you're going to have pay differences, you're going to have culture differences, right? A lot different than just being in a single country. And what we've been able to do now is kind of build the systems to kind of get over that. And so when we look at what is our limiting factor, it's our management programs. So, and where I go with that is the biggest impact that we see from our perspective is the biggest impact on someone's career is their manager. So we are putting tons of resources into building our managers to be excellent managers.
Okay, I can see people leaning forward. How do you become excellent managers?
Yeah, how do you be an excellent manager? So companies usually have company values, right? We have great values, everyone's got awesome values. What we did is on top of that, we built what we call leadership behaviors. And anyone here's company has company values, right? The challenge with values, I think they're really good. They served us well, but they're more like a sign on the door that says, do you agree with this? Yes or no? But once you're in, values in every organization I've seen, even if they're reiterated and they're on posters of the wall, they're interpreted very differently and used very differently. And you would have a lot of contradictory behavior than people saying, well, I'm just talking straight because that's one of our values, right? So the value comes in as, and so when you're trying to coach somebody to get them better, if you tell someone that you failed at a company value, it's actually pretty harsh, right? You're basically saying, get out. So we built these things called leadership behaviors, and we have 10 of them. They're very detailed, but they're very do this, do that. There's anti-behaviors, and they're very coachable points. And so we don't want you to fail the company value, but we don't mind if you trip over on a leadership behavior.
Okay.
Right? And so those things are actually really uplifting the culture. So like our leadership value number 2 is develops Rocketeers, or empowers others would be the third one. The anti-behavior is micromanagers. So don't micromanage, right? Be really clear, right? And then how do you empower? We've got like 4 or 5 points for that.
Okay. So giving clear frameworks for managers.
Yeah, so that's one, is like clear expectations. We do some pretty interesting things. We recruited, we have the mental skills coach from the Sacramento Kings and the Utah Jazz. He's on staff. We have a mental skills coach from the NBA on staff who coaches people in our company. It's amazing.
Makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. But so what Graham does is, especially in the off season, he works a lot more with us then. Rocketeers will chat with him. He'll do some videos internally, but he's all about reps mindset and how to, like when you think about, it's actually been pretty interesting for him because he's like, wow, I didn't know that my concepts would be so applicable in business. But really just taking that athletic mindset, because there is this curve, this old piece of research that's 100 years old. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And it's, if you imagine an upside down U, and the axis is basically how much stress do you have and how much performance do you have. With the optimal amount of stress, you have the optimal amount of performance. If you don't have enough stress, you'll just be on the couch with a bag of chips watching Netflix, right? And if you have too much stress, you're worked up, right? The more capacity you have, the more stress you can take, but you'll be in the optimum level, right? If you're bodybuilding, you need optimum amount of stress on the muscles, right, to grow, right? So understanding that framework gives us a framework also to say, hey, if you're coming to work and you're overstressed, you can name it, you can identify it, then you should also be smart enough to say, well, I shouldn't go to these meetings if I'm overstressed, right? If I'm understressed, maybe I need some more challenging tasks, right?
Do you think that's hard as an entrepreneur? Because often the work is kind of bursty.
Oh, yeah.
How do you manage that in that environment where there's suddenly lots of opportunities and then suddenly not?
So on a personal note, just understanding that that's the framework is good. There's kind of like four variables of finite resource, right? Time, energy, attention, and money, right? And if you've got funding or your cash flow, so money's okay. And a lot of folks say, well, I've only got a certain amount of time. But I actually think the other two are the most important. You only have a certain amount of energy and attention, right? So I'm here doing this. This is using a lot of energy and a lot of attention. Straight after this, I'll want to curl up in front of the sofa and not talk to anyone, put the blanket over my head and just like recover, right? And I'm an extrovert, right? But we all have that. So, but I think for most of us, there is probably 1 to 3 60 to 90 minute bursts of energy a day you have. And if you eat well and sleep well, you'll probably get 3. If you're tired, for whatever reason, emotionally stressed, whatever it is, you might get 1, you might get none, right? So understanding that you have those credits to use and putting them to use on the most important thing is far more important than having your schedule done by 15-minute blocks and trying to be totally organized, right? If you ever try to have a totally organized schedule, you wasted one of those units trying to organize the schedule. And then you're depressed and beating yourself up as a failure by 2 o'clock because you've missed half of them and you're like, okay, this is right. So I think understanding some of those models is important of how you are one person, you're one amount of energy, right? And managing that is really important.
So going back, because there are a lot of people that are going to be watching this that might be UTS students or students somewhere else thinking about what they do. If you could go back and tell yourself something in 2001, when was the start?
Yeah, 2001.
What would it be?
It probably took me 7 years to learn to back myself, which sounds weird.
How much money were you making before you...
And it's hard because we grow up in a society where we want validation for what we do. Hey, is this right? Hey, is this right? Is this right? And so I think I wasted a lot of time. If I was trying to think of how to make it optimal, I wasted a lot of time worrying about whether what I was doing was right. Like as an example, in 2008, I looked at the data and said, right, there's a global financial crisis, right? And I was looking at the exchange rate, and the Australian dollar was like rising. And I was like, okay, like every week it went up. And I was at a board meeting, I said, look, because I was getting up at 5 a.m. at that stage because I was servicing the US, right? So I was pretending I was in the US on the phones, on email, just working US hours for the West Coast. And I'm like, hey, sales is not drying up. It's one indicator. Number 2, the Aussie dollar is going up. right? When the Aussie dollar goes down, it's great. We're selling in US dollars and we have, resources here doing the work, right? And then conversations I was having with others kind of triangulated what was going on. I said, at the board meeting, I said, I'm moving to the US. And the board actually said, let's do it. Everyone else thought we were crazy. Like, what the hell are you doing? Why, everything's imploding there and blah, 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 right? That was the best move, like, up to that date that I had made, because it allowed us, not only did it allow us to establish in the US, rent was next to free, right? And it allowed us to get a foothold, and a year later, the exchange rate started to move back the other way, right? So it's kind of, if you've ever played one of those video games where you got to jump on the log, and the log is moving back and forth, and if you miss it, it's kind of felt like that. That was the moment. And had we listened to anyone, had I listened to anyone outside, I wouldn't have done it. And so that was validation in terms of like, yes, trust the data, not what people say. Trust multiple signals, right? So internally, we use that, what we call it GPS thinking. If you're trying to do a GPS satellite on your phone, you've got one satellite, it's not going to work. You're going to get a guess. But if you triangulate, the more you triangulate, the more accurate it is. So I think that was a significant move for us.
Okay. Yeah. It also strikes me, like, your motivation over 22 years is amazing. Like, where did your motivation come from at the start, and how did that evolve to today?
So I mentioned at the start I was pushing trolleys at IKEA. That was when my dad worked at IKEA, so that was how I got started. My grandparents moved to Sydney from Malta after the war. My dad moved here from El Salvador in the 70s. So it was just we were just always taught to just work, right? Like own it. No one's going to give it to you. Go and make it happen. Not a very entrepreneurial family. So like my dad's first job was painting the inside of, so at petrol stations or gas stations for the folks back in the other home. Underneath the petrol station, there is a huge gas tank. His job was painting the inside of those. So that was my dad's first job.
That's awesome.
So we just had a good work ethic instilled into us. And there was something, if you've ever been to IKEA and you buy furniture and you pay for it and you got to go over there and wait for them to bring it out on a trolley, right? That was my job. My job was waiting at the printer, getting the order, and getting it on a trolley. And I used to get pleasure out of getting the order on the trolley before the customer got to the gate.
Okay.
And that was just fun. It was just fun to deliver that kind of stuff. And it's just that bit of surprise or that bit of element of service. And so how do you bring that to enterprise software consulting? Oh my God, right? So that's I guess what we bring differently, right? So a lot of our competitors don't do that, right? They do whatever they do, right? So,
do you think your motivation has evolved? Like, if it started out as work ethic and then have customers on board and then have employees on board that you don't want to disappoint in that kind of order, and then have something that's starting to scale and be interesting, did it change over time, or was it always work ethic?
I think you realize what it is. I think when I started, this is why it will say, what would I change or what would I do differently? I think if you're running, we're in year 23 of running the business.
Overnight success.
Yeah, overnight success, 23 years in the making, and still hardly anyone knows what we do. I turned 44, a month or two ago, so it's more than half my life doing this. But I feel like I've just started, and I also feel like even there were some days where we weren't going to make it. It feels 5 years ago. I just think it's all part of the journey. Like, if you have a perfect anything, it doesn't go through, go back to that optimal curve, right? If everything's easy, you're not going to appreciate it. It's not going to be worth it as much as if you had to work for it. So I wouldn't actually change anything. I would be upset if I made the same mistakes again, right? But I think we're making different mistakes as we go. So
okay, fantastic. And it must be a strange feeling as well, talking about feelings, to be back in the store where you bought books as a student at UTS, with Atlassian's tower going in behind you.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of years of however much money that is costing, of this giant organization you were part of building and has now made another giant organization as well in the form of ServiceRocket.
Yeah, I mean, they built their company. I mean, we helped do some things behind the scenes, but we're like, someone's, I think when I started in tech was fringe, right? We were geeks and nerds doing stuff. And I remember thinking, oh my God, we do, like when I did this project at J&J, or we did a project at National Rail even before that, I was like, wow, we just put, 30 people out of a job. And this was way back in the 90s, late 90s. I'm like, wow, we're gonna really shake up the world, right? Because we're doing that. So tech used to be very, very fringe, non-political, just a bunch of nerds in the corner. It's very different these days, right? It's causing a lot of angst. I think many leaders in many tech companies are beholden to, just like the governments are beholden to the military complex. I think a lot of the software companies are beholden to the Wall Street complex, right? Got to grow, got to get returns. Our prices have got to go up, and so there is still this disconnect, because the more that you do that, the more that you're actually creating the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, right? So that part is sad for me, because I think, I think growth for growth's sake, just to get returns, at crazy levels, it's a little bit sad at times, right?
So where does that go when we've got giant Silicon Valley-based companies that are, and particularly in AI now, and the amount of work that is hoovering up and the reinvestment that's going to create, and flywheels there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's hoovering up stuff. I think I gave a good talk internally. We've been guilty before about jumping on hype trains too early, and AI is definitely that. I think there is when 25 years ago, if you wanted to travel to New York and get from New York to Connecticut or somewhere else, you would get a map, maybe a street directory, and you would look for the thickest road, and you would work out your directions. And in the .com boom, there was this site called MapQuest. I don't know if any of you probably don't know it, but MapQuest was revolutionary, because you would type in where you are and where you want to go, type it in, right? And it would give you the steps. You'd be like, oh my goodness.
You print it out.
You print it out, and so when you got your rental car, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm taking the Highway 65 this way, Highway 101, 92, right? That was revolutionary. And then you go from that to say, oh my goodness, we have GPS. So now I can work out where I am on the map. Right? We've evolved from that, where we've got live traffic, where we're going, right? We evolved from that, and we're moving towards self-driving cars. But you can't get self-driving cars if you didn't have all that infrastructure. What's happening in a lot of businesses, they're saying, oh, ChatGPT is there, or whatever AI. It's like they're jumping from, I'm looking at a map, just automate it all. And the automation can do some of that, but if you feed it, the better information you feed what you're doing, the better it will be. So you have to nail the basics. You've got to do the work to build towards what's there. And even self-driving cars, I mean, it was like 2012 in Palo Alto in our office that the Google cars were driving by with the KFC buckets on top, right? Yeah. That was over a decade ago, and they're still not really there, right? Parts of it are there. So I think with many things, especially if you're working in services, AR and VR is another one. Great technology, really exciting, but it's like, well, is anyone really paying for it yet? Right? So you have to time, especially if you're doing services, you have to time what you're delivering to what the demand is. So,
okay. And we'll throw to a couple of audience questions in a second, but I'll finish up with one question, which is, you could have gone into a lot of things as a graduate out of UTS. How has being an entrepreneur changed you as a person?
oh, wow. I think it's a great creative way to contribute, right? And I think it's good to be part of something. I think it's, for us, like going back to that Rocketeer promise of building careers to impact families and communities, it's like we can just come back to what we're trying to do. And that's really empowering when you read stories from employees and see what they're doing. And people leave and they go and create their companies and they take the same values and the same perspective. And I think that's what we want to bring, is like, hey, we can build a sustainable model that grows the tree, shares the fruit. And that model is not unique to us, right? We actually want that model to go to other companies and have other people use it.
That's a beautiful thing, to be willing to share your journey, your experience, so that other people can get a leg up that you didn't have. And within the company, all of those people learning different approaches that they can apply themselves as well.
Yeah, when there was no real things to copy for us, but then when there were things to copy, it was, typical models that investors want, right? So I think we have also an opportunity here with you and UTS Startups to say, well, hey, the incubator model and the product model is one, but how do we partner together and share what we've done as a services business to say we can also create hundreds of these, right?
Definitely.
And then you get the two working together.
100%.
So.
Okay, so I'm going to throw to some extra juicy questions. If we can make this very confessions worthy, that'd be fantastic. But yes, just really quickly, and I'll repeat it.
Listening to you tell your story, it's about the journey rather than the destination. So it doesn't sound like you're working towards eliminating poverty or I have a great goal in mind. I'm good at what I've done. My aspiration is to make it bigger and better. Do you think there's a role? Have you ever thought about maybe I should be trying to do moonshots and things? Or is that just not you?
So the question was, moonshots, yes or no? Or is that for someone else?
Yeah, I like how you opened up the piece there where you said it's about the journey, not the destination. And I remember pretty early, in the first stage of the company, and I had another leader in the company, and we had this disagreement. And she actually said that, for you, it's about the journey, not the destination. And I remember thinking, was that an insult? Or like that? Yeah, like it kind of is, right? I enjoy it because I think life is, you get 86,400 seconds to chew up. So hopefully more than once. But actually for me, it's about building the framework and enabling a lot of that innovation. Within our company, we do moonshots and we do things. But I think there are other people that are, to be passionate about a product, you've got to be really, really, really focused on it. And to do that and also build a culture and build the leadership and support people to be the best they can be, I think that's our product. For me, that's my product. So I'm radically focused on that. Before I was trying to do the tech in this, now I'm applying the tech to that part. So I kind of agree, but it's just that my vision, I think once it's perpetually running, I'm happy. I'm not quite there yet, and yeah, so.
Yes.
Just building on what you just said, so this idea of being focused on making your people better, your processes better, and just doing things really well, the echo with you back in IKEA, trying to get there before the customer puts on the till. I'm interested in how you make sure that is what your customer wants. So you're obviously really good at listening to customers, identifying problems that they care about, and making solutions that fit that. If you could give some tips. So not being too solution focused, being problem focused.
So how to get the most from customers?
Yeah, I think so product companies tend to get very relationship driven until they get what they want, and then they become very transactional, just in general, right? And so I think in what makes a services business is all your relationships, both with your customers, your partners, and your team. And it's interesting to just ask the question, like, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing today? And listen, and okay, how can we help, right? All of us love talking about what we want to do and what our problems are. Everyone in the corporate world has goals or OKRs or things or MBOs or whatever you call them, right? Whatever they call them in their own language of what they've got to hit. So I think being very attuned to that. I will say, a big part of our success has been getting to the US. Even before we were there, we were selling to the US. The American market loves to spend, right? Because if a consumer can earn that much, they will load them up with that much debt, which means they've spent that money, which means they've bought that from a business, which means that business has to deliver, so they buy things from another business. So the whole flow through is that people spend. And I've done work in other countries where it's like getting blood out of a stone to get the same thing because the culture is about saving. And so it doesn't grow as much. And so for as much, I think Australians, what we have to also be careful of is we love to throw stones at the Americans, right? And we have a lot of things that are great here. But I think if you just understand how that model works, it's easy to close. Like back in 2003, 2004, we were closing 30, 40, 50K US deals on the phone. And that was unheard of. How would you do that in Sydney without 16 coffees and, and so that flow of what's going on. So once you can learn how to communicate and be reliable, then you earn a lot of trust and you can grow. So, yeah. But like a departmental budget in the US, we worked out was about 30K that someone can spend without getting any authority. Now, in the market right now, it's a bit different, right? Everything is scrutinized and you have to play that. But just think 30K US is a lot of money. And then try and get that out of a company around here. It can be difficult. So.
I might throw in a question myself.
Yeah.
Like, coming back more to Sydney now, and I know you've come back and forward the whole time, but like, what do you think of the kind of Sydney environment now for tech entrepreneurs?
Australia has a really good reputation, like for startups, because we're gritty. We have a reputation of being very frugal. The companies that have done really well here financially are really solid, for the most part, right? So I think we have that going for us. I would encourage people to be global really quickly if they can, because you're able to play in different markets. It's still just in general a very conservative spend environment, just in general, pretty risk averse. And so we find that, I think that hasn't changed. I would say Australia is anywhere from 12 to 18 months behind what happens in Silicon Valley, just in general. So, the Silicon Valley stopped talking about crypto a year ago, and then I'm watching the rugby, and it's like sponsored by Crypto.com. I'm like, really? Like, okay. Like, where am I? It's like a time warp, right? Maybe that sponsorship was in place for a while, but. So yeah, I think there are understand what the strengths of the pieces are, or the economy and the culture and what's here.
But do you think it's where it deserves to be? Like, we've got 8,000 students graduating UTS a year. We've got this kind of tech-ish precinct behind us evolving.
We can build good products and services that are well respected and well paid for globally.
Do enough people do that in Sydney?
I don't know whether I would say enough. I don't know I can judge that, but is there opportunity for more? Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
You heard it here,
So,
people watching.
Yeah.
I had a question about, so think about startups that are interested in working with some of these large organizations like you managed to do. What would be the advice you would give to that are just coming into market that are pursuing those larger kind of organizations as their clients.
So advice for startups pursuing large companies as clients.
Yeah, so it's very context specific on what you're selling and what's there. We continually provide value add where other companies don't or don't bother, right? Some of the projects we do, others might find are just not interesting, but they're so critical for the customer, right? How do we meet our customers? We give away a lot of stuff. We used to give away a lot of free apps, a lot of free software, and go to conferences. I think if you're doing any kind of business in Australia and there's a conference in Silicon Valley related to what you're doing, you should be there, or somewhere in the US, you should go there, spend the time, see who's there. The other thing we did, which we still do, is we're friendly with our competitors. We're really friendly with our competitors, right? I've met 2 this week. I'm having coffee with 1 more tomorrow. And anyone will be like, oh my God, is that like an Elon Zuck like cage match? It's like, no, it's like, you know. So in a thriving, there's actually a difference between the US and Australia. In a thriving ecosystem, there should be many winners. You don't want to be the only one that does, and it's kind of weird because a lot of us in business, I guess when we start, we want to strive to be the only one that does this. And our pitch is, we are the only one that does this. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's pretty, when you say we're the only one that does something, you're actually challenging the ego of the other person to prove you're wrong. So we just say we're the most reliable because we believe we're the most reliable. We've been doing it the longest. Here's my phone number. Call me anytime, I'll answer. I'll be reliable, I'll be there. I'll push that trolley for you, right? Now, most of our competitors have been bought out by private equity. So you can't tell me that a private equity CEO, a company of a company that's been bought out by private equity, you can't tell me that CEO is going to want to take calls 24/7. Like, I'll roll up my sleeves and I'll code if I need to, right? I'll clean the bathrooms if I need to. It doesn't bother me. So we will be the most reliable. I guarantee that. You will not out-reliable us, right? and to the point when I'll even say to our partners, look, what defines a great partnership is not whether we're making money and everyone's happy. What defines a great partnership in life or in business is what happens when things go wrong. Like, do you take the call? Do you make the call, right? Both of those things would trigger most people. Oh my God, I'm busy, I can't take the call. I'm like, am I gonna make the, like go towards it, right? And so if you can do that and do that reliably, what happens with us is that we work with CEOs of startups who go through a whole journey in acquisition and they go and create their next startup. The first call they make is to us. And they're like, we want you on our team. Because as they grow and scale, they know that we've got their backs. Right? And that's not a product or a service. That's a mindset, right? So you can have that kind of mindset in a company of one, and no one can take that from you. Your second competitor and your only competitor from there is your cost. Beat your cost and have that mindset, you can live forever. Just, right? Then you're just working out what to do. So.
I feel like I can't stop this because the answers are getting better. It's got to get better from here. Any maybe last question from anyone? Yes.
It's not super business related, but more about bouncing back from life. So what are the top 3 things you can give a young entrepreneur when they hit a brick wall or the brick wall falls back on them for them to bounce back?
Top 3 things you can give entrepreneurs to help them proceed or bounce back.
Top 3 things. Well, I think listening, big one. Mentorship is the second one. And I think a mirror would be the third one. not in a bad way, but like being able to echo back or share back and that's part of mentorship. I think, there's harsh realities, and we all have blind spots. I have a lot of blind spots, right? So like being able to see what those blind spots are. So, yeah.
Okay. Fantastic question.
Yeah.
And I'll say, feel free to use this video as a mirror to look back at yourself. Maybe you'll pick up something along the way. But this has been wonderful. And as I said at the start, I think you're an incredible example of what I'd love to have more of from UTS. I know that the talent is here, the enthusiasm is here. These people
we have it here. We're just we're gonna enable it. So that's part of my commitment to being back here. So.
And that's the thing. I've also got to call out, I haven't seen anyone be more involved as an alumni in supporting the next generation in direct mentorship, taking part in events, everything else you do. So thank you for setting that example as well. People will benefit from this and from everything you do.
Yeah, thank you. I want to call out two very special people. One was George Fulick, Dr. George. He was our database lecturer. And when I was at Borland, I was working the booth at a conference. And he came by, and I chatted him up. And this is going to go on record, so we've got to be careful. So, and it turns out that the stuff that I was coding and teaching, he was also teaching. So he got me to teach a master's subject and help him do that. We did that together.
Nice.
And we did it in a way that I got credit points, and it helped me out significantly. So he helped me out a lot. And the other one is Des Saunders, who I ran into on the bridge the other day. But Des has been a big supporter of ServiceRocket and me and all the students. And I think Des really encapsulates that value, or those values of just tireless, effortless service. And whilst Des isn't an entrepreneur, that kind of ethos is huge. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you, Rob. This has been incredible, and we'll end it there, but join me in thanking Rob Castaneda.
Thank you.